If you've been following along with our tutorial, then today we're going to go from this to this. Hi, my name is Michael, and welcome to my 2D action and adventure RPG tutorial series. We are learning how to build a top-down 2D game that features action, adventure, and RPG mechanics all in Godot 4 using GDScript. In order to have our scene ready to work on, let's just go ahead and create a couple folders and files here. So let's create a new folder in the root of our project, and we will call this Tilemaps. Within the Tilemaps folder, I'm going to create one additional folder to house the sprites. We're only going to have one sprite to begin with, but let's go ahead and add that. Now, if you have a tile map that you want to use and you want to just try and set it up yourself using this tutorial, go ahead and do so. But if you need, you can also download the Tilemap, the grass Tilemap asset that I provided on my itch.io page, which is linked in the description. And you can use that to follow along. You'll have the exact tilemap that I do, so that might make it easier if this is your first time. So let's go ahead and import that. Open my sprites folder here, and then let's go ahead and open where I've downloaded the asset to. I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop it into the sprites folder. Click back to my project. There we go. It just imported. Okay, so I've got my grass 01. Now within the Tilemaps folder, I'm going to just right click and say create new scene. Now this scene, I'm just going to actually call this grass 01. Just like the name of my sprite sheet. And you can change the type here, the root type of the node. By default, it's just a 2D scene. And we can always click on here and find the one that we want. Let's go ahead and do that. If you type Tilemap in, or tile is all you really need, there's a Tilemap. I'm going to go ahead and select that. So this new scene will have a Tilemap as the root object. So what we're essentially doing is we're setting up a Tilemap node that's already going to have a pre-configured set of assets and tile rules so that we can just drag and drop it into any level and use it without any setup or with minimal setup. That's all we need to do for the first step. We've got our new tile map. It's called Grass 01, and we've got our sprite imported into the project. So we'll start there. Okay, so now that we've got our tile map created and this new scene created, let's go ahead and set up our tile map. Now the tile set that I've provided is a 32 pixel by 32 pixel grid. We can go ahead and look at this, just this little image here. So each little box section of this grid is 32 by 32 pixels. So in our tile map settings, let's see, we want to configure a new tile set based on that. So we'll click under tile set here and select new tile set. And once we've done that, we can expand this. So there's a tile size. The default is 16. I don't know. I don't really like 16 by 16 pixels. I think a lot of people do. It's really up to your discretion and to some degree your art style that you're going for. But like I said, ours is 32 by 32, so I'm going to set that up. And then I'm going to go, let's see, I'm going to do a couple things here on this. I want to set the ordering of this up ahead of time. So there's a Z index. This is like a layer, right? So 0 is the bottom layer, 1 would be on top of 0, and so on and so forth. And since I want this to always be beneath the player by default, then we're not doing any Z index setting on our player. I'm actually going to set this to -1. That way, anytime we drag in a tile map into a new scene, it's always going to be beneath our player, and it shouldn't have issues based on any positioning otherwise. Now, we've got our tile set here. We've set up a couple things on our tile map. In order to begin setting up the tiles, we need to get familiar with the tile map and the tile set panels. So you'll notice in the bottom panel here in Godot, I don't know what this thing is called, but you know, the bottom section. It's where our animator showed up previously. We've got tile set options. So you can select this, and you can see we don't have anything in here. It's totally empty. But underneath tiles, we can just drag and drop our image. We'll get this prompt if we want it to automatically create tiles in the asset. And you can see, since we've already configured this to be 32 pixels by 32 pixels, we've already see a little preview down here, and you can see that that grid looks exactly how I want it to. So I'll just say yes, and boom, we've got a tile map that's automatically got these grids in it, or this grid of tiles set up. And we could go over here to Tilemap and we could pick a portion of it and just start drawing. Okay, pretty cool. Pretty easy to get just that basic tile map set up. But we're gonna go ahead and actually take this one step further. Actually, let me show you just a couple fun things. You can drag and select an area in your tile map and just paint with that whole selection. And there's some other cool things we can do. So I'm gonna just go ahead and erase that. I'm erasing that by using the right mouse click. Okay, let's just kind of test this out real quick. So let's go to our playground scene, and I'm gonna go ahead and drag and drop this grass scene in here. Drop it on playground. Now we've got our grass scene when we select it. Let's turn on this grid mode here. This is for the grid visibility. This allows you to see. Oh, I haven't saved my tile map first. That's kind of important. We should do that. Let's save it. Now when we go over here, there we go. Now we can see it's got a grid. It's all set up, and we've got the grass just like I was showing before. There's a few ways to draw. You can do paint bucket fill. I wouldn't recommend doing that on a no shape, but I'm going to just grab the rectangle, draw a rectangle of grass, and then just hit play. Our scene's going to look a lot better now that we've got something behind the player, right? It's already looking better. Let me just do one more thing before we take this any steps further. Let's suppose we wanted to add one of these little mountain structures here. I'll just plop one in. When we run the scene, we haven't set up anything to detect collision, so the player can just walk right across it, right? So let's go ahead and go back to our grass tile map scene. And we're going to set up some physics layers and collision shapes so that we're able to have collision. And that's going to make it so that, you know, our player won't walk through walls and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this screen pretty large right now. Underneath our tile map and Tileset, we're going to update some of the settings. So we're going to go to this physics layer section underneath the Tileset, right? And if that's not expanded, you click on the Tileset itself and expand physics layers. Let's add an element. So now it's got a physics layer. We're going to go ahead and turn off the collision mask, and we're going to turn off layer 1 on the collision layer. That's the layer that the player is on, and we're going to put it on layer 5. And in fact, there's something we can do with these layers. Numbers can be hard to remember what their purpose is, but if we click on the little menu option on the collision layers, we can edit the layer names. So let's just call layer 1 player, so we know that that's the layer that contains our player collision type objects. Layer 5 that we just turned on for this, let's just call it, I don't know, walls or something like that, right? So we know that, okay, anything that we put on layer 5, any collision shapes we put on layer 5 are supposed to be walls that the player should bump into. Go ahead and close that. Now that we've got a physics layer added and configured on our tile set, we're going to come back over here to our, down at the bottom, click on the tile set section, make sure we're selected on our grass sprite, and we're going to go over to the paint option. We can select a property to paint down here, and there's a lot of things that we can paint, and we'll use at least one other of these during the tutorial today, but let's just pick down here underneath. I want that tooltip to go away. Underneath physics, there's physics layer 0. That's the layer we just added. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And you can see I've got this box here. How to explain this? This is a representation of one tile. So you can see I've got a box, and when I come out here onto my tile map, I've got a cursor, and I'm going to click on one that's a solid piece of wall. And you see when I click, it made it blue. So now that section is configured to be part of this physics layer. So we can just go ahead and click on any of these solid pieces of wall that the player can't walk through. We'll just add those, right? I don't know if we can add these as well, maybe. Now we get into a situation like these that are partially covered, right? We want the player to be able to walk on some of the grass. So we don't actually want that shape, but you'll notice in this little painting dial or UI, we can actually drag these little points around. And in order to keep it pixel perfect, I like to turn grid snap on, and I'm going to set this number of grid divisions to 32 because that's how many pixels we have. So now I've got this little scene here. We can zoom in a little bit. I wish this window were a little bit easier to resize, but now you can see I've got a little marker for each pixel and it's snapping to them. So that'll make it pretty easy to create a shape that is pixel perfect. So create something like this, right? The blue area is where the player cannot walk, and then the empty part is where they can walk. So now I can just click this onto these little layers here. This one's interesting. Let's just drag this over. We just need to make a tiny little corner piece where the player can't walk, maybe. Something like this. And you can actually right click on one of these little nodes and it'll just delete it. So now we've got a little triangle shape. See how it did that there? And then I want to paint this one over here as well. And you can actually just press the H button and that will flip it horizontally. You can also press the V key and that'll flip it vertically, right? So just align it how you need to. There, that one goes there. So for this next section here, we can just go through. We need to actually add a point back in. So I'll just click on that. You can middle click and drag to be able to move that. And see, I'm just lining this point up with that one, and then I'll drag this over here. Just kind of quickly set up collision for these shapes. Flip it, paint it on the other side. I'm just going to go through and do that for the remaining shapes in my scene. Now, one more thing you can do though is you can actually eyedrop a shape if you want to get back to a shape. There's also an option here to reset to the default tile shape or clear the tile. Either way, if you want to get an empty one or you want to just reset it to a full square. Okay, so let me go ahead and go through and edit this now. Now we've got a few other sections of pieces that we're going to want to configure, like this one here. These shapes are a little bit odd, but same principle applies that we've been doing this whole time. You might actually need a few extra points. This one looks like I need a 5th point. There we go. Okay, we're almost done. There's just some shapes here that I need to fix up. So these corner pieces, I think, and then I think we're good. There we go. And it's good to keep these shapes as simple as possible. I don't think it's really an issue if you get them kind of complex, but just for the sake of your sanity, don't overthink it. I mean, it's just basic shapes. The player's not going to see these lines in the game. They're just for our reference while we're drawing. So just set them up as is, and we should be mostly good to go. If we run back to our playground scene or run our project, our player's still going to walk through these walls. We need to set one more thing. The walls have been set up to have a physics collision, but the player is not colliding with that layer. So if we go into our player scene, right? Let's go ahead and click on our player. Let's edit him. When we select our CharacterBody2D, the root node, our player here, he's going to have his own physics settings under collision. And you can see right now he's got a mask and he's got layers. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off mask for layer 1. What the layer is are the layers that this collision object belongs to, and the mask is the layers that it's looking at for collision. So we don't really care if the player collides with the player, right? And there's only going to be one player, most likely, so we can turn that off. But we do want him to see if he collides with the wall. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn the wall's layer mask on. So now the player collision is going to check against that layer. And when we run our project, he should now bump into the wall. Very good. Can't walk through the wall, so we've got our basic collision map set up for this shape. And you can see, you know, he can run around the corners and whatnot. And we could draw some of these other shapes in. I'm just going to let's go back to our playground, select our tiles. You know, we could come in here and draw some of these corner pieces. I'm going to add a bunch more grass up here, which isn't going to be super useful at the moment because our player camera doesn't follow the player. We'll do a real brief implementation of that today as well so that we can make better use of this tile map that we're setting up. But I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple things here just for the sake of testing. Those pieces right there are designed to line up with this section of wall. Okay. So now if I run the scene here, we go, we've got some areas for our player to walk around and collide and all that. And it's starting to make the game look more like a game now that we've got some backgrounds. Okay, so now that we've got our tile set kind of working in our scene, we want to take this tile set and we want to make use of these path terrain items that have been drawn. Now these have been created to match this pattern here that you see in my A-sprite file. And this is a fairly common way of setting up an auto tile palette in Godot. And there are other ways to do it, but we're just going to use this as an example. So if you didn't grab my file and you have your own, you might have to adjust what you're doing a little bit. Otherwise, you can grab the sample sprite sheet on the itch.io page I have linked in the description. And so let's go ahead and let's go back into our grass, into this scene, and we're going to edit a few things here. So we've already added a physics layer, right, to this tile set. We now want to add a terrain set. So I'm going to just go in here and click add element, and it's going to make a new terrain set. And this terrain needs another element added. And I know this seems kind of weird and confusing, and there are complaints about this in Godot, but honestly, once you kind of figure it out and set it up, it's really useful. It's worth dealing with a little bit of the confusion. Not saying it couldn't be improved, but you know, I'm going to go ahead and give this a name called path, because we're going to use this for drawing our paths, okay? And we'll leave the color as brown. That matches our path. Now we're going to go into our tile set panel here, and where we were painting these physics layer shapes before, we're going to now paint something different, and we're going to expand the paint properties drop down, and underneath here you'll see terrains. So select terrains. There we go. And then terrain set 0. And then we need to select one more, and that's path. And you can see here in our window, the display of our sprite sheet has been updated and all the grids are darkened. Once we click on one of these, it will highlight or display in normal color, and that means that it's now part of this terrain set. So I'm going to go ahead and real quick just paint over all of these. Okay, so that's our path terrain set. That's where we're going to pull this from. Now you'll notice that there's this little white square on the quadrants of the tile that I'm selecting. Now this changes depending on the type of terrain set. You could say that it matches sides, and you can see it's only going to match against the sides. And corners is similar, it only does corners. We want corner and sides because we have a more complex terrain set here. And rather than try and explain this all with words, I'm just going to go ahead and draw. So each piece of our terrain should have a center square, right? That means when we draw a tile, if it matches a rule, right, then we draw it based on the surrounding tile. So in the case of this one on the end, if there's a path terrain above it, then it will draw this end piece, right? If there's only one below it, it'll draw this end piece. If there's one on both sides, it'll draw a regular path. If there's no matching terrains on any side, it draws a single, and so on. Okay, and some of these patterns can look a little bit complicated, and this is laid out the way it is just to try and make the most use of space. So you can see that there's some that seem to terminate in corners and sides. We'll deal with that. But I'm going to go ahead and just paint all these in and speed this up, and then you can match it when you're done. Okay, looks like I've got it all finished here and all these lines drawn. So that's what we need to do to get this set up. Okay, so now that we've got this tile set set up, let's make sure we save our tile scene here. And I'm gonna go ahead and minimize this a little bit. I'm gonna go back to our playground and look at our grass layer here. We've now got the option when we select Tilemap to go over to terrains, and we can select path. And when we're drawing a path, usually you just want to use this option here. These represent the tiles that are part of this terrain brush, but I'm just going to select this and draw a shape. And you can see Godot is automatically helping connect those lines. Okay, we just draw one, we get a little shape like that. So yeah, we've got this nice automatically completing thing. And you could set this up for any part of our tile set that you wanted to. Depending on how complicated it is or how easy it might be to just use the tiles as is, you may not need to set up one of these terrain items for each of them. But just be aware that if I come in here and paint with if I come in here, oops. Oh boy, I just clicked a whole bunch of things. So if I come in here and pick just the grass and come in here and draw, it isn't gonna end that path properly because I didn't draw it with a terrain set, so it gets a little confused. So you could manually fix that if needed, or you could go back to your terrain set and draw with that. But regardless, it's a pretty handy tool. It's really useful, not only for top-down, but for platformer games and things like that. Let's go ahead and run this project one more time and run around. So things are working pretty good, but we've got a few issues here that I want to point out. One is the camera is not following the player, right? Another is, and this is something I didn't think of when we did the initial player video, but when he walks diagonally, he walks. Oh, that was interesting. I got him to moonwalk. He walks twice as fast. Almost, well, not twice as fast. He walks faster than when he's walking straight. We want to fix that. Also, just some minor issues, like when you're walking against this wall, it would be nice if he slid down along it without having to press down. It works fine going up because of the angle, but we'll go ahead and fix that as well. So stop playing around with this and let's address a couple of these items. So let's open our player scene. Now the first thing we can do really quickly is just simply go to our root player, add a child node, and add this camera 2D. And this is simply gonna stick a camera in our player and it's gonna move with him, right? And there's more we could do with the camera. We'll do that in another tutorial, but for now and for simple prototypes, this is sufficient for moving the player around. Okay, now let's go and adjust one other thing. Let's adjust the stickiness on those slanted angles. So the player, this is a mistake I made when we did the original setup of this player. The motion mode is set to grounded. Grounded motion mode would normally be used for a 2D platformer where you're jumping. When we have a top-down game, we want to do floating. And that's not going to affect any of the code we wrote, but it does give us this option, the wall minimum slide angle. And I'm going to change that to 10% and test the game. Now when we walk sideways against these edges, the player is going to slide along them. So that's nice. And then let's just address this diagonal movement speed issue now. And we're going to do this in our player code. So this stems simply from how we coded this direction. When we have, say, player pressing left and up, then you get a strength, an input strength of like 1, right? -1 and 1 or whatever. But it's 1 in two directions, which is faster than 1 in one direction. And there's actually a pretty easy way to handle this. And we could just say direction dot normalized. We could say like direction equals direction dot normalized. Actually, that will work. And what normalized does is it prevents the vector from having a magnitude greater than 1. So even if it's diagonal, you know, if it's 1 in X and 1 in the Y, then it's going to be converted to like a 0.7 in both directions so that the total magnitude is not greater than 1. And we'll test it out real quick, and then we're going to make one other quick change. So now his diagonal speed is normalized, right? It's not faster than his straight walking speed. So that's good, and that's easy. And there's actually one other thing that I noticed when I was looking over this. The way we did the direction here, it's not wrong, but maybe it's not the best. I'm going to go ahead and just comment that out. And I'm going to say, actually, we'll do it right here. So our direction will equal, and I'm going to remove the normalize. We'll add that back in just a second. Say it's a vector 2, okay? And instead of doing input dot get action strength, we're going to do get axis. And I just had forgotten that this is a thing in Godot. it's pretty useful. So you can see it takes a negative action and a positive action. So for the X direction on our vector 2, that's left and right, and left is negative, and then right is positive. Put a comma, make a new line. Do the same thing for the Y direction. So we're going to get an axis. This time it's up and down. Okay. And that's our vector 2. So you notice we did that. You could put this all in one line if you wanted. I'm going to go ahead and leave it spaced like this because I kind of like the readability of this a little bit better. But I'm going to go ahead and add my normalized back onto the end of that just by typing period and then normalized. So there we go. We're setting our direction now with this line of code. And functionally, it works the same. But it's a little bit cleaner and a little bit nicer. So there we go. Now we've got this game where you've got a scene, and hopefully you have fun drawing your maps and making things. And we're going to take this further. We're going to start doing things like adding props to the scene, adding enemies, making the enemies damage the player, and things along those lines. And thanks for following along.